The best of money matters. The big story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin Jeong. Got an extra condo or room sitting idle? Well, that's exactly what criminal syndicates peddling e-vaporisers are looking for now. Syndicates are using young people to rent homes to store e-vaporisers. And when the scheme is busted, who takes the fall? The tenant. The story gets even more revealing. The Straits Times has actually managed to speak directly with some of the advertisers behind these schemes. So how do these operations actually work? Well, joining us today to share more is Andrew Wong, correspondent of the Straits Times. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Hongbin. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, Andrew, how did you first learn about this story? Did you yourself come across one of these ads on social media?
So we learned of the advertisements on Telegram sometime in July. It was me and another colleague of mine from our Chinese daily Cao Cao. And the advertisement struck me because, the sellers were brazen enough to openly promote their businesses. And so soon after the new measures were announced on July 20th, I believe, when Health Minister Ong Kang said, there was a possibility that it told me it was going to be listed under the NDA. So I dug deeper and then I discovered that there was a number of groups looking for individuals to rent units for vape storages, and then we found an entire ecosystem of so-called jobs related to vaping.
So from what you saw, Andrew, how explicit are these advertisements? I mean, do they disclose that the job involves storing contraband, or is that part hidden or implied?
They're pretty explicit. I mean, they like right on the advertisement itself, they state the purpose of the rentals, which is to store vape supplies. And then many of them even state the amounts that they were willing to pay for such services, which range between like $500 to $2,000 a week.
Oh, wow. So how exactly are syndicates luring young people then to rent homes and using those homes to store vapes?
So from our conversations with them, this is done through impersonation. So the criminals that rent these homes pretend to be me, for example. And then this is done through a few steps, right? So first, they would ask you to provide pictures of your NRIC and then details of your bank accounts. And then this is because they claim that they need both these details to arrange for house viewings with property agents. And once the viewing is set up, you'll be asked to recce the place on their behalf. And then after viewing the units, you are expected to update them on the suitability of the place for the purposes that they are using it for. And then this includes, how strict or relaxed the security post appears to be, availability of side gates, and then nearby public transport and amenities like food. And then once the contract is signed with the landlord, they will send an address for you to deliver the keys and the access card. So this way you don't come into contact with anyone from this particular group, and then your job is basically done at this point. So another group will then take over to move the supplies into the rented unit, which they would probably operate for up to about a month before they move again.
Right. I mean, then why have syndicates turned to this method, you think, using youths and rental homes to keep their vape operations going?
Well, we believe that this is done so that they can sort of circumvent the law, especially with the enhanced penalties for vape suppliers, even more so for those that supply laced vapes. This way, it's harder for the authorities to track down these people who are behind the operations. Even if they manage to sort of raid this rented unit, it would probably lead them to the person that has actually rented the unit on paper rather than the actual suppliers.
What is the scale of this operation as well from what you've found? How many people or homes are involved?
It's hard to say because they remain quite evasive, and I tried to probe further into, the past experiences and operations. But we know that at least there is a team of people behind the two partners that I spoke to. And one of them claimed to have worked with several people in the past, although he mentioned that only one has been caught by the police so far.
So what do the adverts say exactly, and how do they try to recruit people?
So the advertisements are mostly similar. They advertise for people who are looking to make a quick buck or like a side hustle. And then they'll state very clearly that they're looking for people to rent units for vape storages. And then there are also the other jobs related to vaping, which could be like your job packers or like delivery. And then those interested would simply just contact the accounts behind the advertisement.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you've had a conversation with so-called advertisers, and I believe contacted two advertisers on September 2nd. What did the advertisers say when you first reached out?
Both of them, the first thing that they asked is how old you are. So this was because if you were too young, you wouldn't be able to rent a unit for them. Because I believe in Singapore, you have to be at least 18 years old to enter such a contract. And then moving on, they'll try to get more details about you, such as your job, and then the flexibility of your job. Because they're looking for someone who's able to go to these property viewings whenever they arrange for them, which could be like in the middle of the day. So they're not looking for someone who has like maybe a very strict 9 to 5 and can't get away. They need someone who is able to attend these viewings whenever they want and then to close these deals so that they can start their operation.
Were they very upfront about what the job actually involved?
Yeah, it was pretty straightforward. I don't think there was any attempt to hide what units will be for. I mean, during the conversation, it popped out at least a few times that these units are for vape storages.
Did you guys ask about what are the consequences if, let's say, or you got caught? Who would that fall under?
I mean, they didn't exactly state the consequences would fall to which party, but, that there was a very elaborate scheme in which, they sort of reassured me when I probed further in terms of, how I would be protected, whether how safe this whole scheme was. And yeah, they're putting like certain steps in place to sort of give you that avenue to deny that you knew what was happening.
Okay. Well, then in comparing the two conversations that you've had, were they, similar in how the advertisers pitched the scheme?
They were largely similar, but I mean, by a stroke of luck, the two advertisers that I spoke to ended up being partners working for the same operation. Yeah, so one of them, he calls himself Jojo. He gave me more details into what they were doing because he was more comfortable speaking over the phone. Whereas the other partner, he was only texting me here and there. And then once he realized that I was speaking to his partner, he stopped replying.
Well, then how did you feel as a journalist, Andrew, during those conversations? Did you sense they were cautious or were they very confident and operating quite openly?
They were extremely confident. I mean, they assured me multiple times during the conversation what they were doing is going to be safe for me. And I mean, in fact, one of the verbatim lines that he told me was that it was safe because he was very confident of what he was doing. And like I said, the scheme is quite elaborate. They bring in like additions of shell companies to sort of protect you in a way to sort of allow you to be able to claim to be a victim if you were to be caught by the police.
Okay. Well, is there anything else that you've learned from those interactions in terms of how they operate and how they are expanding?
Yeah, so just back on that point, we believe it's the whole ecosystem that they're operating here. So first they take the control of your bank accounts and then they try to get you to sign up for more bank accounts, like multiple accounts and even cryptocurrency accounts because they claim that cryptocurrency accounts are easier for them to take control of and use. And then they also let us into how they would create, shell companies and such. So these companies would then come up with fake contracts to cover up what they're actually doing. So for example, they'll draw up an employment contract for me under this shell company to hire me. So if the operation was to be busted and then I'm being investigated by a police, they've told me to sort of say that I was hired by this company under this contract for units for rentals for workers, but this company hasn't actually been paying me, so actually I'm a victim of a scam. And then they make sure to separate me from the rest of the team, which deal with the vapes themselves. So I don't directly see or deal with the vapes. And then claim that this way I cannot be prosecuted for dealing with the vapes, even if I'm charged.
Okay. Well, for the youths that are not aware then, Andrew, how much risk are these people exposed to if they take on these, rental schemes? Are there any long-term consequences?
I spoke to lawyers on that, and many of them told us, there are various provisions that these youths or anyone that takes part in these schemes can be charged for. So, for example, tenants who permit their premises to be used for offences, which in this case could include controlled drugs. They can be dealt under the Misuse of Drugs Act. And then tenants or landlords who are found to have facilitated such activities can be charged with abetment under the Penal Code. And then there's also the issue of, giving up control of your bank accounts to these syndicates. So if you're to be convicted of that, then that's a whole other range of punishment.
Overall, Andrew, how does the scheme fit into the wider trends of vape activity here in Singapore?
I mean, just the fact that we are uncovering these activities, even as the crackdown on vapes in Singapore is intensifying, it reaffirms our belief that, the situation warrants these strict measures that have been announced on August 28th. So these are groups of people who are happy to take the risk of enhanced punishment to push out vape supplies in the local market. And then they are attempting to explore new methods to stay ahead of the authorities. I mean, this is just one of them that we know of. So, I mean, we are also quite mindful of a report by the United Nations that came out in May that warned of a looming crisis of synthetic drugs being pushed into this region. And then that coupled with, the government's concern that vapes are becoming a drug delivery system, it should be a cause of concern for the rest of us.
Do you foresee a further crackdown on these schemes by Singapore's authorities as well?
We believe the authorities have stepped up on their enforcement efforts, and I think we've all seen how the government has brought in more help to the Health Sciences Authority by, I think they recently mentioned they've almost doubled the enforcement numbers. So I expect there will be a continued series of enforcement operations targeting these vape-related syndicates, but we will have to give it some time to, sort of really see how these new measures play out and then see if the situation improves.
Definitely some great insights from you there. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was Andrew Wong, correspondent of the Straits Times. Now, if you want to read more about Andrew's article here, it is available on the Straits Times. It's titled "Wanted: Young Tenants to Rent Condo to Store Vapes and Take the Fall." This has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.